それでは18時になりましたのでですね、本日の、ジーナ・ダウジングさんとそのサインセックスさんによる、インタビューを、始めさせていただきたいというふうに思います。私はですね、本日司会進行を務めさせていただきます緑の党グリーンズジャパンと、あとヤンググリーンズジャパンに所属しております酒井と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。では、はじめにですね、開会の挨拶ということで、緑の党グリーンズジャパンより、尾形さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
こんばんは。私は緑の党グリーンズジャパンの、共同代表の一人の尾形恵子と言います。今日はイギリスの緑の党から、お二人ゲストを招きました。石炭火力発電をどのようになくしていくかっていうこの経験をお聞きします。先日、菅首相が2050年までに、ゼロカーボンですね、二酸化炭素の排出をゼロにするということをおっしゃいました。これ、世界中で結構話題になっているみたいです。その辺のことを聞いてみたいと思います。今日はよろしくお願いします。
はい、ありがとうございます。では続きましてですね、緑の党と、紹介と、あと今回のセミナーの流れというものをですね、酒井悦子さんの方から紹介していただきます。よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、皆さんこんばんは。緑の党グリーンズジャパンの会員で小金井で市議会議員をしています酒井悦子と申します。ヤンググリーンズのメンバーの一員でもあります。私からは緑の党の説明をさせていただきます。画面を共有していきます。地球一粒で生きる緑の党グリーンズジャパン。緑の党は1970年代にオーストラリアやニュージーランド、ヨーロッパ各地で結成され、80年代から90年代にかけて世界へと広がりました。2001年に国際連携組織グローバルグリーンズを結成。現在、世界約100の国や地域で活動しています。グローバルグリーンズは4つの連盟で構成されていて、各地域での世界大会を開催してきました。再来年2022年1月に第5回大会が韓国ソウルで開催される予定です。グローバルグリーンズ憲章の6つの理念を掲げていて、グリーンズジャパンもこの6つの理念に基づく緑の社会ビジョンの実現を目指しています。詳しくはホームページでご覧いただけます。緑の党グリーンズジャパンは2011年の3.1 東京電力福島原発事故を契機として2012年7月に結成。2013年参議院選挙に10人の候補者を立てて挑戦しましたが、議席を得ることはできませんでした。現在、全国に会員サポーターがおよそ900人、連携する自治体議員、首長などおよそ100人、サポーターの国会議員が2人というネットワークがあります。今、世界ではグリーンウェーブが起きていて、緑の党が大躍進しています。気候危機を最大の政治課題とする若者たちが、緑の党の大躍進をもたらしているんです。昨年2019年5月の欧州議会選挙で、緑の党は大躍進し、第4党になりました。現在、ヨーロッパで緑の党は7つの国で政権に参加しています。北米カナダ、南米コロンビアでも躍進。アフリカでもコンゴに続いてルワンダでも議席を得ました。アジアでも台湾、韓国で国政に挑戦しています。フランスとドイツの自治体選挙での大躍進も緑の党ならではのボトムアップの展開です。10月のニュージーランド総選挙では女性、LGBTQ 先住民の多様性に富んだ10人、まさに緑の党です。環境を最優先に持続可能な社会を目指す緑の党を日本にも作るために一緒に活動していきましょう。
ありがとうございます。はい、続きましてですね、今回の、セミナーに先立つ、前提知識として日本の石炭火力の現状の方を、緑の党の松本さんの方から紹介させていただきます。松本さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、皆さんこんにちは。こんばんはですね。 松本奈美穂です。緑の党グリーンズジャパンの共同代表です。本日は気候危機回避に向けまして、最も省エネなヘアスタイルでお届けしたいと思います。では早速始めていきます。この、セミナーの前にですね、日本の石炭火力発電について現状をおさらいしておきたいと思います。これは日本全体の電源構成です。石炭が 27.8%、LNG 天然ガスが 36%、石油が 2.6% と続いています。水力、太陽光、そして風力、地熱、バイオマスを合わせた自然エネルギーは 18.5% となり、毎年伸びてはいるんですが、石炭や天然ガスといった化石燃料に依存している状態です。次に電源構成の推移を見てみましょう。まず第一に、全体としてほんの50年前の1970年代から現在に至るまでに発電量が3倍以上に増えていることが分かります。石炭はオレンジ色で示されておりまして、1980年代後半に比べると約3倍に増えています。石油の方は石炭の上のグレーの部分で、ちょうど石炭と入れ替わるように減少傾向にあります。紫で示された天然ガス、これも増加傾向にあります。そしてなぜか緑色で示されています原発について言いますと、皆さんが脱原発運動を頑張った成果は現れていまして、もうベースエネルギーに返り咲く可能性はありません。もちろん油断もできませんが。そして改めて全体を見ると、1997年に採択された京都議定書など完全無視するかのような形で電力使用が増えており、それを石炭と天然ガスと石油が支えてきたということが分かります。これは日本が石炭をどこの国から輸入しているかのグラフです。71.6% とダントツでオーストラリアから輸入しています。その次にインドネシア 11.4%、ロシア 11.1%、アメリカ、カナダ、中国と続いています。これは日本国内の石炭火力発電所を表した地図です。ジャパンビヨンドコールといって、さまざまな環境 NGO や団体が連携して、2030年までに石炭をゼロにしようというキャンペーンが9月にスタートしました。そのサイトに掲載されている地図です。グレーの運転中が160機、計画中、建設中が17機、そして、長期中止が3機となっています。あと10年でこれら180機をすべて水色の廃止にしなくてはならないわけです。そんなこともう無理だと諦めてしまいそうになりますよね。今回お話を伺うイギリスは、2012年には 38.3% の電力を石炭に頼っていました。それをわずか8年でゼロにしました。いかにしてイギリスは石炭をゼロにしたのかについて詳しくお話を伺い、日本が石炭ゼロを実現するためのヒントとしましょう。ありがとうございます。
はい、松本さん、ありがとうございます。現在ですね、このウェブセミナーはですね、86名の方にご参加していただいております。その86名の皆様、お待たせいたしました。いよいよですね、ジーナ・ダウジングさんとジョナサン・エセックスさんにインタビューを行っていきたいと思います。それではインタビュアーの松本さんにここから進行をお願いしたいと思います。松本さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、改めまして松本奈美穂です。まずですね、最初に、ジーナさんとジョナサンさんにお二人に自己紹介をお願いしたいと思います。
Hi, my name is Gina Dowding and I am a Green Party councillor in the north of England. And for a very short period of time, I was a member of the European Parliament for the UK Greens. And I've been involved in active campaigning against the shale gas industry as well in the UK.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Essex. I'm a Green Party councillor in the south of England, and I'm a member of the Greenhouse think tank, which is a think tank linked to the Green Party here. And I'm researching how we reach zero carbon for the difficult to decarbonise sectors in the UK, such as trade and transport, and eliminating things like coal from making steel.
Thank you so much. ありがとうございます。本当にこんな風にね、世界中でつながれることとてもありがたいと思っています。 そしてですね、今日はなんとオーストラリア緑の党、先ほどね、石炭を日本が一番輸入している国、オーストラリア緑の党からのメッセージが届いておりますので、それを皆さんに見ていただきます。
Hello from Australia to the Japanese Greens Coal Forum that you're co-hosting with the UK. I'm Adam Bant. I'm the leader of the Australian Greens, and I am coming to you from Melbourne, where I acknowledge the traditional owners of our country and pay respects to elders past and present. I really want to congratulate you on hosting this excellent forum about coal and the significance of coal and how we can move past coal. And it's especially important because for Australia, Australia's major contribution to climate pollution and the climate crisis is from the coal that we export. We are the world's third largest exporter of fossil fuel pollution when you take into account our coal and our gas. And if you took into account what Australia exports, we'd be the sixth largest polluter in the world. So Australia by itself emits about 1.3% of the world's emissions, but when you take into account what we export, we are up there on the podium. And Japan plays a critical role in that because Japan is Australia's largest export market for coal. You buy the most of Australia's coal in Japan of any other country. So that's why we here in Australia, we're very excited to hear the announcement about net zero emissions by 2050, because if that happens, and if the Greens are able to push and make that law in Japan and make it a reality, then of course 2050 being zero emissions, you have to have the electricity sector at zero emissions much earlier than that so that you can then move industry and transport onto renewables. So that means for Australia, coal exports, you might stop buying them within a decade or two. Now, as is always the case, given this announcement, there are going to be a lot of forces pushing against that. And I hope that the Japanese Greens can help us in Australia to get past coal by getting the Japanese government to come up with a firm timetable for when it will exit coal, so that we can here in Australia can say, well, it's clear they're going to stop buying our coal at some point, so we need to begin the transition here at home. And in this respect, I'm really pleased that you're teaming up with the UK Greens for this. We have worked closely with the UK Greens in the past and take a lot of inspiration from the amazing work being done in the UK. And I'm so pleased that you're focusing on coal because it is the big thing. It's a major cause of the climate crisis. It is the thing that we need to get right. And I think there's a prospect for Australia and Japan to be working really, really closely on the question of coal, and for us, the Greens, and the Japanese Greens to be working closely on the question of coal over the coming years, because it will be a big shift that we could make in both of our countries if we can get an agreement about phasing out coal. So congratulations on this forum. I really hope it goes well, and thanks for everything that you're doing. Bye.
はい、ありがとうございます。ご覧いただけましたでしょうか。それではですね、お待たせしました。お二人、ジョナサンさん、そしてジーナさんに質問を始めていきたいと思います。まず第1問目ですが、イギリスでですね、石炭火力発電所をゼロにできた理由、ズバリ教えていただきたいと思います。どんな法律や制度ができたのでしょうか。よろしくお願いします。
Thank you. Just want to say it's a pleasure to be with you today and to share some of the success of the UK, but not to over-egg our success, because we still have a long way to go in terms of fossil fuel reduction. I think it's fair to say that, yes, we have achieved a lot in terms of the first 3 months this year. The UK provided a half of its electricity supply through renewable energy, and that's mainly offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar. But we do still, sadly, use coal burning for industry, and Jonathan will talk a little bit more about that, the real need to tackle all fossil fuels. In the UK, we were lucky because lucky in some respects. In the 1980s, our government closed down a lot of our coal mines. There was a lot of hardship left in those communities, but it certainly set the scene for a burgeoning renewable energy industry. And I think we can't separate the two. The success of stopping coal has to be put in context of the huge success of the renewable energy industries in the UK. And that started with, to some extent, some subsidies, but the cost of offshore wind has come down by 2/3 in just a matter of years. I would just finish and then I'll let Jonathan continue, but I think it's fair to say that the key factor in that has been the price and the reducing price of renewable energy. And it's been a demand-led, so a huge demand from the public for clean energy, which has really helped to support the renewable energy sector across the country.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a few words and maybe start by saying I think the reason why coal has ended in the UK is because of campaigners and because of the work of the Green Party. I think there's been first of all, we challenged that there should be no new coal because there was pressure to build new coal power stations about 10 or 15 years ago. The public would say, oh, but don't worry, they're building lots in China. And our pressure was also, you know, we need to do this in our country too. So I think that was the first step. And I think it's been much harder in the UK to stop the existing coal. And in that, I think it's been very important that we have the pressure and collaboration with other countries. So the commitment across the EU to move towards renewable energy is one thing, but also the commitment we had in making climate change a law that we needed to go to zero carbon here. I think that was also very important. So there was the pressure to stop as well as the pressure to invest in new renewable energy. And when the government started subsidizing renewable energy, and on the other hand, the European Union required taxes on fossil fuels, which made coal more expensive, we've come to the situation now where renewable energy is the sensible, cheapest thing to invest in if you want energy generation. And finally, I just wanted us to say, as Gina introduced, that we have not yet ended coal in the UK. In the last month, there's been permission to build another deep coal mine, which campaigners are challenging now to the highest level in the law courts. And the justification for that has been for economics, but also for jobs. And likewise, we still burn coal when we make steel. There are two large plants, one in England and one in Wales, that burn coal. When one proposal was that this should be changed to electric arc furnace at the Wales one, the Labour MP said that this would not be acceptable because of the loss of jobs. So as Greens, we're really campaigning strongly to link the end of coal to the creation of lots of local jobs for renewable energy. So I'm working on a plan for the green jobs alternative in the Cumbria area. But also as Greens, we're making that case nationally that shifting away from coal for the last coal burning in the UK, which is to make steel, is a good thing. And we should be creating jobs across the economy, creating a circular economy, rather than relying on the few jobs that remain burning coal here in the UK.
はい、ありがとうございます。とても詳しく教えていただきました。2番目の質問なんですけれども、先ほどのね、お答え、その石炭採掘業であったり、製鉄業の方々が、いわゆる抵抗勢力になったのかなというふうにお答えいただきました。その他にですね、石炭火力発電所をゼロにする際に、どのような問題とか課題に直面されたでしょうか、あるいは今もしているものがあれば教えてください。
I think that the biggest challenge we have is that it's not just about coal and it's not just about electricity. We need to phase out all fossil fuels if we are to deal with climate change. And we need to look not just at the power stations that generate electricity, but how power is used in our transport, how we burn fossil fuels, including coal, to make cement, to make steel, to make plastics, to make paper, and how we heat our buildings, often not with coal now, but also with gas and oil. And I think if the challenge is to move to zero carbon, is to move the focus just to be focusing, as it was in the UK, on electricity, to now the UK started to focus on all the other sectors and how they can decarbonise. And may I just share the screen? I'll just show you one slide. So this is a slide that shows the real challenge. So rather than see the problem as the fossil fuel industries, I think we need to see the problem as coal. And rather than set our targets being political or economic or about how much we can get business to do, I think we should start by looking at the climate challenge and how much we have to do globally. So this slide shows how much fossil fuel reserves we have left in the world and how that compares to how much we can burn to stay within climate limits. And the headline of this slide says that, you know, there are 9 times more fossil fuel reserves already discovered in the world than can be burned if we stay within climate limits. Yet in the UK, we are still looking to find even more oil and gas by difficult measures. So the big campaigning efforts here are to not make the situation even worse by finding and extracting fossil fuels. I accept there's also the burning question, but 9 times is a huge amount. And I think this highlights that we as Greens have really focused on this challenge in the last 2 or 3 years in the UK by talking about a climate emergency. So rather than thinking what we can do is limited by what businesses tell us they can do, we need to think about what we can do as being limited by what climate change can cope with globally. So we need to put science and climate science right at the front of this issue. So it's not about what business can do now, it's what business must do for our future.
I would just add to what Jonathan has said in terms of the pushback from business and how we've mobilized our voices against the business interests. So, and this leads on perhaps to another question about campaigning, but there's been a huge campaign about divesting from fossil fuels in the financial market. So lots of public sector workers have their pension funds invested in global equities, and there's been a big divest campaign. And we've talked about reducing the risk because of stranded assets. So this was what Jonathan was referring to. So basically, fossil fuel companies, their value is based on the reserves that they have or that they've found, but we know they just will not be burned. It's not within the limits of the planet to burn those. So we've mobilized a lot of the public and workers against the big companies in terms of a divestment campaign. So that's one aspect of our campaigning, to reach widely into the community. And I think also the way we've approached this in the UK as Greens is to really sell the benefits of the vision we have based of a clean economy and the amount of jobs that it will produce in renewable energy and the benefits, the win-wins in terms of the economic recovery actually being better for everyone and having more equality and a better quality of life if we actually transitioned the economy to a renewables, clean energy, zero carbon economy from one based on fossil fuels.
はい、Thank you so much. ありがとうございます。ですね、実は日本ではちょっとした問題が起きてまして、というのは石炭火力発電所をやめるけれども、バイオマス、つまり木材を燃やして発電しますと、その木材を外国から輸入して木材を燃やすので CO2 は増えないよというふうに日本ではそういう問題が起こっているんですけれども、要はが日本では起こっているんですが、イギリスではそういうことは起こりましたか？
There's a very short answer, yes, sadly. I'll let Jonathan speak.
So in the UK, we have the power station that burns more wood imported from other countries than anywhere else around the world. So it's called Drax Power Station. It was ironically the site of the first climate camp, which in 2008 was a campaign group calling for no coal burning at Drax power station. And they've decided to turn 2 of the 4 burners to burn wood instead. So the government subsidised this. So we taxpayers in the UK pay £790 million a year subsidy for this to import wood, mainly from the south of America. And the accounting of the energy, the carbon benefit of that burning, it doesn't include the energy to ship it to the UK. It doesn't include the energy to cut down the timber and the logging industry in America. And believe it or not, neither does it include the carbon emitted when you burn the timber and it emits carbon dioxide. The problem is also a scientific one, because we emit carbon now on the promise that new trees, which don't yet exist, will grow and reabsorb that carbon in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time. But we need to reduce carbon emissions fast now. And the problem with climate change is if we emit too much climate emitting gases, principally carbon dioxide now, we will cause runaway climate change. So the idea that we can cut down trees across the planet now and somehow we can replant them later and that we won't have a problem is a myth.
はい、ありがとうございます。なかなか切実な、日本も抱えている同じ問題を一緒に解決できたらいいなと思っています。それではですね、先ほどのお答えにもあったんですけれども、具体的にですね、イギリス緑の党が、2050年までに、脱石炭だったり、脱炭素 あるいは、温室効果ガスゼロにするために2050年へのロードマップおよび、政策、どのような政策を持っておられるかお聞かせいただけますでしょうか。その前にですね、ちょっと皆さんにお伝えしたいのですが、今ですね、参加者95名の方が聞いていただいております。ありがとうございます。では、質問お願いいたします。
So we have set up in the UK, the short answer I should say is we don't have a clear roadmap. But on the positive side, we do, our government has legally committed to zero carbon by 2050. And the government's, we have an independent committee on climate change, which brings in experts, scientists and policymakers to advise the government. And they have published their recommendations to the government, and the government is about to respond, hopefully, we've heard, in the next few weeks. And what will happen when the government announces its response? I wanted to say a few words about campaigning. So every opportunity that we have as UK Greens to use any announcement by government, we will try to mobilize public support for again, fresh demands for a much faster transition to zero carbon than the 2050 the government has committed to.
Jonathan, please.
Okay, again, may I just share my screen? Although the government here doesn't have a plan, the Greens have had plans for quite a long time now. So one of the excellent researches done in the UK was Zero Carbon Britain, which they've produced a lot of revisions of their work. So as new science has come forward, they've produced new versions. But their first report, I think, was published in 2006. And I think the combination of a strong position from the Green Party with clear reports like this produced by campaigners, produced by academics, supported by trade unions across the UK has meant that there's been almost a movement saying that zero carbon is possible, and the Green Party has been able to speak clearly into that space. But I think our challenge now, as I mentioned, I think at the start, is for a long time now we've had a real movement towards zero carbon electricity. So we've got lots of wind turbines being built. We've had subsidy for solar power. We're now focusing on electricity storage as an important issue. But the real challenge now is how we focus on zero carbon in issues like transport and industry. So to continue to lead on this debate and move it from debate to action, I think what we in the Greens are doing now are focusing on making sure our policies set out how we can get all the way to zero carbon. So on this slide, this is from a report called the Energy Transitions Commission, which is Mission Possible. It's not by the Green Party. This is an industry report, but it shows you the challenge that we have now to face. So we're now focusing on how we decarbonize industry like cement, steel, and plastics. And the hardest transport to decarbon isn't cars where you can go for electric cars. It's what you do about lorries, about heavy goods vehicles, about vans. And then it's what we do about shipping and aviation, where the only solutions really are to have much, much less of it. And that means that the challenge for zero carbon for Greens is not just about switching technologies. It's about changing the way our society fits together. It's by reducing demand such that we've got enough space to then lift up the renewable energy capacity so that we can fit within those limits. So we've got this challenge now to explain how zero carbon is not just about technologies. It's about changing our lifestyles. It's about bringing our society more local. So rather than relying on global goods being shipped in with lorries, ships, and planes, with more cement, steel, and plastic, how we can reuse more what we've got already, how we can transform our society in a way that's better and fairer. And that's challenging because we're dealing with the technological issues on one side, but we really need behavior change from the public as well as change from industry. But I just wanted to maybe end by saying that, while we have big industrial challenges like shifting to make steel from electricity and old steel scrap rather than importing more coal and iron ore from around the world, I think as Greens, we want to focus on the positive alternatives and show that that's a compelling vision for a different future in the UK, which is all summed up in a phrase which we call the Green New Deal. And maybe we can cover that more in a future question.
I just wanted to raise one more thing before we move on about, because I know you're very interested in Japan in the role of the businesses themselves. And I think one of the things that we have tried to focus on, and certainly happens in Europe, is to expose the lobbying of the corporate fossil fuel industries so that they are, wherever possible, expose the lobbying that they do to keep the status quo, so that we focus on government. We address our concern to government. We don't directly try to campaign to change the behaviors of business. I was very pleased to see when I was in the European Parliament, there's a whole collection of NGOs and campaign groups who are specifically, when I say NGOs, funded by the public and interested parties who are trying to expose that lobbying that takes place, and they're called Corporate Europe Watch. So they're actually keeping an eye on all the money that big business is spending on lobbying governments not to enact climate law or climate change negotiations. And because this is quite significant for us in the UK, because most of the lobbyists were focused on the European Union. And now that we're leaving, we will expect to see some of that big business lobbying coming directly at our government. So it's a really important issue, and another angle where we can try, because I think we have to look from all angles, but it's making sure that we are watching what big business is doing, that they're not saying one thing, but actually spending lots of money on trying to keep the status quo and trying to protect their own interests on the other hand.
はい、ありがとうございます。まさに今お話しいただいたイギリスの NGO からの情報ということで私も聞いてびっくりしたんですが、日本の場合、電力会社、そして鉄鋼部門とかですね、たった7業種、セメントも入ってましたね。7業種がGDP10%、日本の GDP 全体の 10% ぐらいしか GDP をもたらしていない7業種がパワフルに政府に働きかけてるっていうのを、それを調べてくれたのがイギリスのNGO だったので、きっと今お話しいただいたことを日本にも情報を提供いただいたんだなというふうに今思い出しました。それでですね、質問の方に戻るんですけれども、ですね、皆さんからも質問をいただいてまして、先ほどジーナさんから少しありましたが、EU を離脱するにあたってですね、何か不利になったこと、メリット、デメリットを教えていただいてよろしいでしょうか。
I think it's fair to say that we see very few benefits as Greens because our best hope for leading the way in terms of climate talks, climate negotiations, and a really clear path to zero carbon is through the joint efforts of the European Union countries. It remains to be seen really what happens in reality, and there are some disadvantages of the EU. One of the things that the EU is struggling with, the Greens in the European, sorry, I'll stop there and I'll tell you. One of the problems at the moment within the European Union is the common infrastructure projects. And again, led by big business, there's a huge pressure for investment in gas infrastructure across Europe, which will tie us in to gas as a source of fossil fuel energy. I would say on the Greens in the European Parliament are fighting against that. And I would say as part of a global green family, we can at least celebrate the fact that in the European Union, we have such a strong Green Party present. It's the fourth largest group, very dynamic green politicians who are fighting very hard for zero carbon at the earliest opportunity and are always pushing every other group, and they have a lot of respect there.
If I may add just briefly, just to say, I think Brexit is about two things. It's about democracy and it's also about trade. So I think in terms of international democracy, it's very important for the UK to work with the EU. In terms of trade, us leaving the EU has led to the UK spending its foreign aid money on trying to get free trade agreements with many countries around the world, and also trying to have a new free trade agreement with America, with the US. It's far better from a social and an environmental point of view for us to get more of our goods from nearer where we live. So ideally, leaving the EU, we should be producing and consuming much more of what we need for our lives within the UK. We should be more self-sufficient. But unfortunately, the Green Party doesn't run the UK. So the chances are that it'll be more global as a country, which I think is going to be damaging for the environment. I guess that there might be a similar parallel in Japan in terms of how much of the resources needed to run Japan as a society can you find from within Japan, or how much do you need to bring in by ships or by airplane?
はい、全くその通りです。私たち、1億2500万人がどういうエネルギーで自立できるのか、どれぐらい自国で自給できるのかっていうのも考えていかなければいけないと思います。ありがとうございます。それでですね、ちょっと短い質問なんですけれども、石炭火力発電所が止まることによって電気代は上がりましたかという質問が来ているんですが、お答え教えていただいてよろしいでしょうか。
The short answer would be yes, but maybe a longer answer might be maybe, because if one thing is the price for a unit of electricity, And the second is, how much electricity and power do we need in total? So what we want to see as Greens is, while the unit price of electricity goes up, we want more money, more effort to be spent to make all the buildings better insulated, to have more energy efficient standards on the electricity devices which we use. So our overall energy use goes down, even though the price per unit goes up. So what we need to do is, while we shift away from coal to renewable powered energy, mainly in the form of electricity, we also need then to manage demand down in society, so there is less energy used in total. Now, the global modeling on this shows that a shift to a zero carbon society will reduce the total amount of energy we need. So yes, the unit price goes down, but if we do that as part of a shift to a zero carbon country, part of a zero carbon commitment worldwide, then overall the cost shouldn't go up.
はい、ありがとうございます。とても専門的な質問で、答えていただき嬉しいです。ではですね、今質問が来ているんですけれども、気候正義ですね、他国に対して、どのような観点で、緑の党、イギリス緑の党は政策というか訴えをされているかをお聞かせいただいていいでしょうか。気候正義についてお願いいたします。
I'd just like to share with you the concept that's been gaining a lot of traction in the UK, called the Green New Deal. It's been pushed by the Green Party for a number of years, but just recently, partly because the Labour Party also adopted a similar, and the European Union is talking about a Green Deal. And I'd like to share with you a document, but just to explain this concept really is about climate justice globally and within the UK. So I'll just very briefly explain, and apologies if this is something that you're familiar with already. I produced this report when I was an MEP, but focusing very much in the northwest of England. And it's really looking exactly at the issue of how do we tackle the climate emergency, but leave no one behind. So how do we ensure that there's social, environmental and racial justice underpins our climate actions? So our report and most of the Green New Deal approaches look at what are the highest carbon producing or carbon consuming sectors, and how do we get to zero carbon in those. So in the northwest of England, which has had a historically a high reliance on industry, we looked for our region, how do we decarbonize the energy supply sector, industry itself, buildings, how do we actually achieve comfortable zero carbon emitting buildings, retrofitting with energy efficiency measures, land and food, and transport. So these 5 sectors. Just to add to that, of course, what we didn't look at is the energy embedded in trade itself, and that is exactly Jonathan's expertise. So when we were looking at our regional economy, we didn't look at trade, and that was a missing sector, but there's been lots of work done on that. So I just wanted, when we were talking about climate justice, I just wanted to outline the principles really underlying the Green New Deal, which are all about justice. So it's not just about dealing with the climate emergency, but making sure that there are fairer, socially distributed improvements for everyone as we implement that transition. And I'll just mention a few words about each of these underlying principles. So obviously the first one is recognizing the emergency, that we need to scale up our solutions, and we need rapid and radical action, and that needs to start now. I think that goes without saying. And in terms of global climate justice, any Green New Deal must recognize that each local community or national country has to take responsibility for its own emissions and not simply offset them to the developing world or elsewhere, the kind of points that Jonathan has been making about trade particularly. Underpinning the Green New Deal is the acceptance that we need to mobilize finance and get a huge investment package in the right things. But it's really important that that is a just transition so that we focus investment in those areas that are going to suffer from the loss of fossil fuel jobs, to revive them, create good quality jobs and redistribute wealth where it's most needed within our societies. And I'll just summarize the others very briefly. So the issue about public money being invested for public goods, so that we must only use investment from our public coffers, if you like, our public resources, to ensure that the benefits are shared by everyone: cleaner air, secure water supplies, improved health for everyone, so that the public money isn't used to bail out only the private sector. And then two other really important things. Firstly, localizing democracy, which is so important, particularly at the moment, to actually empower people to take more control over their local economy as well, so that we actually start to look at new forms of ownership of business, community-owned businesses, mutual organizations, cooperatives, and that we use this transition so that we share out the benefits of the future improvements and future ownership models. And finally, I think this is where the Greens are unique, wherever compared to any other political party, in terms of we're the only ones saying that we have to end this attachment to endless economic growth, and we have to start rethinking what is success of an economy, talking about things like the circular economy, the steady state economy. And so where we are measuring things that are important to people's lives, like security, equality, health, well-being, and not economic growth as defined by traditional models of economists.
はい、ありがとうございます。Thank you so much. ですね、質問が何問か来ているので紹介したいと思います。食と農ですね、食べ物、そして農業、特に今言われているのは肉食、お肉を食べることによって結局二酸化炭素がいっぱい出てしまうんじゃないかということで、それをどうやって減らそうかというふうに日本の緑の党も考えているんですが、イギリス緑の党のどんなふうに考えておられますでしょうか。
You're absolutely right that agriculture and food production is a really key source of carbon emissions. But again, it's not just about the meat we produce, but it's about the distance that our food travels. And I think we have to be putting everything into the broadest possible context about localizing our food supplies as much as possible. And obviously, the move to reducing the amount of meat we eat has quite a strong voice in the UK, but I think it's equally important to be looking at the transport of fertilizer for big business, all the other trade related aspects of our food system, and supporting local food growers.
I would just add that I think there's a strong movement in Europe, and it's also now in the UK, for food sovereignty. So how much of the food which we eat is produced in our own country? And in terms of meat, when we look at the amount of meat we consume, it does link to deforestation of places like Brazil to turn into pasture land. So we have global responsibilities even when we sit down to eat a meal. I think the challenge for us as Greens is to set out the positive vision of what that looks like. So rather than be, say, setting rules and saying you can't eat meat, what we want to do is encourage the public to eat less and take more responsibility about where the food is coming from. So, for example, in the UK, what we want to see is more local production, less factory production. And the problem for meat is not just when we import meat into the UK, it's when we import animal feed into the UK to feed animals produced in the UK in factories.
はい、全くそうですね。ありがとうございます。 それではですね、今日はですね、実は海外の方、英語がわかる方も参加していただいて、緑の党の、海外の方も参加していただいて、何問か質問にも織り込ませていただいているんですが、日本の緑の党の人からですね、質問です。イギリスでの脱原発、原発ですね、はこの間どんなふうになっているでしょうかという質問です。
Well, I could answer briefly. It's separate from the question of nuclear power generation for electricity. We had an opposition leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who was supportive of a reduction in nuclear weapons, but the Labour Party and the Conservative Party still remained committed to nuclear weapons. So in the UK, the Green Party is still the only party that is committed to unilateral disarmament of nuclear weapons. And in the UK, we have commitments for nuclear submarines, and many would say that this isn't very sensible because, you know, in the future we could have small undersea drones that go and find these nuclear submarines, and they're no longer, it's no longer safe to, you know, have nuclear weapons wandering around the bottom of the ocean.
One of the things I would add is, and I'm sure you have similar experiences in Japan, is whenever one wants to move away from our less desirable industries, the argument, even by the left and other political parties, is always comes back to the jobs. So you can't shift to different, you know, that transition is prevented by the argument that there's too many jobs involved in that industry and it'll be lost. And I think that's why having our positive vision of a transition or a Green New Deal, which is about investment in those new industries and the benefits that they will bring in terms of jobs, if they're in the right place, if they're in where communities are most affected by job losses, that's our, as Greens, we can keep banging on all the time. There's a different way to do this. It doesn't have, we don't have to keep the status quo. There's lots of win-win advantages of shifting to a safer and low carbon economy. And I just saw a question come up about nuclear power and phasing out nuclear power generation. So in the UK, our Committee for Climate Change in response to the government is recommending, is still including the possibility of new nuclear power stations. They are still being built. We have one at the moment, but the argument against nuclear anyway, apart from all the climate and the safety issues, are of course that the costs are so tremendously high, and actually renewables are far, far cheaper now. So there's no cost argument anymore for nuclear. That's an argument we hope as Greens to be winning over the next few months actually in the UK.
はい、ありがとうございます。日本の緑の党も脱原発、脱石炭で、脱炭素ということでね、いきたいと思っています。頑張りましょう。それでですね、来年のですね、イギリス2021年11月にですね、COP26 がイギリスのグラスゴーで開催予定されていますよね。それについてぜひイギリス緑の党の皆さんの展望とか訴えたいことを教えていただいていいでしょうか。
Well, on that, I can share a slide in a second. My big suggestion of what we should be doing is including trade in a deal for climate and including climate in deals for trade. At the moment, we've got a situation where there is a voluntary agreement for climate limits within each country. The UK is slightly different in this. We're one of about 6 or 7 countries that have legal targets for carbon reduction. I think that should be for all countries, and that's something the UK can lead on. Let me stop there and then I'll talk about trade. So in terms of COP26, the first thing is to say that trade means that we currently in the UK and other countries ship fossil fuels around the world. So while one country makes money from extracting it, then another country will burn it. If we want to deal with climate change, we need to deal with both of these. We need to have the countries that extract the fossil fuels stop the extraction, and the countries that burn the fossil fuels stop the burning. This kind of commitment is complicated. It needs agreement that we are going to reduce the movement of fossil fuels and reduce the size of the problem. The second thing is the climate agreement we currently have, the Paris Agreement, doesn't include the impact of international trade. So it doesn't include none of the carbon emissions of international shipping or international aviation are included in any country's carbon targets. This doesn't make sense. All of the countries' carbon targets together should add up to all of the global carbon emissions. We need to have an agreement which takes responsibility for all of our climate change problem. And all I would say is this also causes a problem of climate justice. So in the UK, we are only taking responsibility for emissions within the UK. So not only do we not include all of this international trade, we also don't include all of the emissions that are produced in countries where we import goods from. And many of those are developing countries. So we have currently a system where we set limits for each country, and then we say, yes, but why don't you spend some of your carbon limits to produce stuff to send to us? Whereas I think there was a question asked in the chat about agriculture. All countries around the world will need to spend some of their carbon budgets in making sure there's enough food to produce locally as agriculture shifts to zero. So the idea that countries in Africa or China should somehow be taking responsibility for what we consume, this doesn't make sense. So we need to make it a joint responsibility. We need to be responsible, each and every country, for what occurs within the country, but also what we consume. That's complicated, but I think that's what's needed to deal with the problem.
And shall I come in with my 3 points, if you like, on our aspirations for the COP26? I would repeat Jonathan's issue, which is really, I think we can frame as carbon justice, so that basically we all take responsibility for the carbon emissions in the goods we consume, whether or not they've been produced in our country or whether or not they have flown or been shipped miles. So climate and carbon justice. My second point is really the climate win. So climate jobs and all the other benefits from a zero carbon economy, if we follow the path to transition that we have as Greens. So we will see satisfying, rewarding work, training opportunities, warmer homes with lower electricity bills. We will see clean, efficient public transport. Just some of those glimpses of what we can get the benefit of the zero carbon economy. And finally, I would say that we need to reclaim that ground, that as Green parties, we are the political wing of all those varied environmental groups and campaigning groups who are focusing on different single issue campaigns. And we as a Green Party can help bring a voice to those issues and give agency to all the different demands from our voluntary sector, from our campaigning sector, and from the general public. And I think for leading up to COP, the Green parties across globally have that opportunity to bring together voices for the future and really give agency, give voice to those people from disparate communities all across the world in terms of climate.
はい、本当にありがとうございました。長い間に立って質問に答えていただきました。最後の質問となりますが、ここでですね、皆様にも、紹介させていただきたいんですが、小野リリアンさんという環境活動家の方がですね、今日こちらに駆けつけていただきまして、小野さん自らですね、質問をしていただけるということで、バトンタッチしたいと思います。
ありがとうございます。小野リリアンです。じゃあ一つ質問させていただくんですが、緑の党のようなとても大切なミッションを持った党がこう政治の中で主流になっていくように、こうどのように国民に興味を持ってもらえるように工夫しているか。で、特に若者がこうの票が集まってくるようにどのような工夫をしているか聞きたいなと思いました。
Thank you for your question. I think the voice and the activism has been absolutely tremendous across the globe over the last 2 or 3 years. The Fridays for the Future movement, the Extinction Rebellion movement, and it has given huge voice to the demand for change to government. And I think that has really boosted the voice of the Green Party policies, but the main thing is it has changed public opinion with the campaign movement's creativity. And I have to say, I'll add a personal story as well, but I just wanted to add that I think that the Green Party can be the honest voice of politicians in responding to those demands from the public, so that we are authentic and have underlying principles for our policies. And just occasionally, it is even appropriate that Green Party politicians also take part in direct action. And I was very honoured to be asked. I actually took part in some direct action against the shale gas in Lancashire and ended up being arrested and going to court with a bunch of very committed people from local residents from who had worked really hard against a new shale gas extraction site. But it wasn't a stunt. It wasn't that I was just joining in. I'd been campaigning within the council chamber, doing everything I could politically, and I felt then it was my turn to join them in direct action as well. So I think that there can be a really strong liaison, strong cooperation between Green Party politicians and councillors and that direct action and campaigning movement.
So very briefly, I think that first of all, we need to be inspiring and we need to be ambitious enough, because I think young people want us to be setting out what needs to be done rather than being like many politicians, which is setting out what they think they can say as being the right thing now. Secondly, I think we need to be honest, and I think we need to be honest about how difficult the climate challenges will be and about how the future will involve more disasters than today. But within the space between disasters and catastrophe, we need to find hope. And finally, I think there's too much of an inside-outside thing in politics. Either you're a campaigner or a lobbyist or an activist, or you're an elected politician and you have power. What we want to do as Greens is to share power, share responsibility, and show that ultimately this isn't about politicians and powerful businessmen taking action. This is about giving power back to everyone and showing that only when we all care enough is a different world possible. So I just want to say thank you for having us. An unusual session for us to be part of. And my final comment about the future is really we need to think of the Green Party as a party without boundaries. Most political parties represent the people who vote for them or support them, but I think we need to be a party that basically takes a stand for everyone, even when they don't see themselves as being part of us. So we need to end them and us. And I thank you for being able to join you and us on this call.
ありがとうございます。長時間にわたりまして皆さんに、お二人ジーナさんとジョナサンさんに、インタビュー、そしてインタビューの中でですね、皆さんから参加者の皆さんからいただいた質問も織り込みながらインタビューさせていただきました。すべての質問に答えられなくて本当に申し訳ないんですけれども、これでインタビュー、そして Q&A の時間を終わりたいと思います。最後にですね、ジョナサンさん、そしてジーナさんと一緒にパネリストで写真を撮りたいと思いますので、ちょっとお時間頂戴します。
Please smile and greens. Say greens. Okay.
Green.
Greens. Say.
Green.
Green. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Good. Wishing you the best of luck with all your work and campaigning in the months to come. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gina and Jonathan. We heard a very impressive. We are very moved from your comments, and then we must say goodbye now. Well, we really want thank you for the long period of time. ここでジーナとジョナさんにバイバイを言いたいと思います。Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good luck.